Okay, and so with that, let's actually get started. For today's live demo, today what I want to show you is how you can build this recipe search website only with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The HTML and CSS I've already prepared. It's already provided. So if you look, we're going to work with this index HTML here, and the CSS and JavaScript is already written, so we're not going to deal with that for now. What we're going to do is we're going to go through step by step of how we can introduce this following API here. So we're going to use this API called Recipe Puppy. What Recipe Puppy is, it's an open API. There's no token involved, and what you can do is you can provide this parameter I, and with this parameter you can pass with comma separated different ingredients that you want. You can also just pass one, just cheese for instance, and through that you will receive a list of recipes that contain that ingredient, right? And if you do cheese and eggs, then it will show you ingredients that contain cheese and eggs. And we want to take this data from this API and display it the way we display it here. Right now, this page is not functional. If we do type anything here, nothing really happens. And step by step, I want to show you how you get from showing just this mock of data to dynamically getting this data from an external API and introducing it into the document object model and thus displaying it in the browser. So the first thing we need to do is we need to actually make this input here functional. Right now, what it does is it takes a parameter, cheese for instance, or potato. If you click search, what happens is the form submits. Because we have, if you look at the Visual Studio Code, oh, I see there's one person with a question maybe. Miriam, do you have a question?
No.
So Miriam, if you have a question, let us know.
No, I don't think so.
No?
I think I just pressed a button maybe that I was not supposed to.
Okay, no, I just saw your hand up, that's why. Okay, thanks. So unfortunately, it's very hard for me to see all the hands. If you do have a question, maybe let's just type it into the chat, and then I can also open the microphone for you, because it's we now have 130 people in here, and it's not as easy to look at who actually has their hands raised, but I will try to do that too. Okay, but to continue here, the first thing we want to do is we want to see how to connect the information that we can get here with the actual JavaScript. So if we go here and look at the form, the way the form looks like, it's a very standard form. We have an input, right? And we have a button with the type submit. What that means is once you hit the button, then the form will submit itself. And if you just have a form element here, what it will do is it will take all the inputs you have from the form and it will attach them to the request if you submit. So and now I can also pass some parameters. I can say, well, I want to have a different action. I don't want to pass it to this index HTML. I want to pass it to search HTML. And then we also heard about in the lecture, we have heard about things like method. We don't want to pass it with get, so the standard is get. We want to pass it by post. So those are things you can control in the form to send information with the form. So, right, but we're gonna stick with the standard one because, okay, let's see. If I do this and I type this here, this will go to search HTML, which doesn't exist right now. All right, so what I want is I just want the standard form action, right? Well, let's go back to the index. Okay, and I want to do something here. Now, there are multiple ways of introducing this dynamic behavior that we were thinking of here. The first option that I will show you is I want to prevent the standard behavior from happening. So if I type cheese, I don't want this whole round trip to happen. I want the requests and response to happen within JavaScript and not leave the page. So what I want to do here is I only want to use this input as an actual input and not as a form, not as a classical form request response type. So in order to do that, first things first, I need to go and have some script here. So as I type script and type module, this means that I can use modules within the script. So, and we will use modules which are namespaces that you can include into your code, and we're going to use this in a few minutes. But right now, what I want to do is I want to say I have this form, right? And how do we get this form? We get so in this case we don't have an ID on the form, but we have an ID on the section. Usually, what you would do is you would add a form ID too. But in this case, I just want to show you that you can do things like document.get or not even get query selector, and that allows you to provide this CSS selector type syntax. You say search and then form, and this will give you the form. Okay. And the next step is we want to attach an action to this. So what I can do here is I can say form.add event listener. And what event listener does is it attaches a function to some event that once the event is triggered, you do something. So we want to attach to the event submit. So a form, the only event that this form can have right now is the submit form event. So we do this, and now the callback function we need to define has to have one parameter, and the parameter is the event that is passing. Right. And now, if we do this, and we just say, let's say we do anything, right? Do console log. We are in the submit event. Okay. If we do this, there's still a default action attached to this event. So if I go back here and I try this, and I say cheese, it will not do the thing I want to do, because it will execute the code, but it will still do the default thing that it's supposed to do. It will send this message. So what we need to do here is we need to say event.prevent default, right? And as we do that, let's do this. Now if I type in cheese, I mean, nothing happens right now, but it's not submitting. So you see here that we were not actually submitting this information. The default action that was supposed to happen here doesn't happen. Okay. So what's the first thing we want to do? Well, if someone doesn't type in anything, for instance, we want to display some sort of error. And I think maybe the easiest thing we can do here is just we can add a red border around the input field. It will show the user that there's something to be done. So here we can actually go for this input. This input does not have ID, but let's add an ID here. Say the ID is ingredients, right? And here we can say, oh, let's see, search input. Okay, now we can say search input style. But we'll only do this if the input is empty. So now what that means is it takes the search input, which is the document object model element in here. It tests the value, whether it's empty, and if it's empty, it adds this red border. So if we reload this and we say cheese. Okay, let's see what I did wrong here. I might have. Oh, Jesus, it's not empty. So now that it's empty, there you go. So if it's empty, have the border in here. Okay. So that's the first thing I wanted to do here. So that's the first boundary condition. And now the other condition is, so if it's empty, okay, do nothing. So do nothing means we have to return here, right? And otherwise, let's search. So let's have a method called recipe search, where we provide this string. And now if we define a function here called recipe search, right, with a search term, now, oh yeah, there's one thing I want to point out here. So what we can do here with a recipe copy is we can provide multiple ingredients. So we want to have the same thing here. Now, the thing is that, oh, you can say cheese and eggs and potatoes, right? You can do multiple. And now there's something to be said about representation here. So how do you want to represent multiple ingredients? What you can do is you can just pass on the same string, and because it's the same, the API also allows for the same, let's say, structure, we can just pass on the string. I would say what I would still do is I would go ahead and say, well, I would have a function called parse ingredients, for instance, right? That takes a string, ingredient string, and returns to me all the ingredients that are in that string as a list. Because what we actually want, we want a list of ingredients. We don't want a string that is separated by commas. It's just a representation of that data. What we want is an actual object representation, and that is a list of strings that contain ingredients. So what I will do here is that I will say, well, return to me the ingredient string dot split. It's a very simple parser, right? So I say, well, const ingredients, then let's call it from input. And we say search input the value, right? And so now recipe search receives a list of ingredients. Okay, and if we log this here and say ingredients. So if I now say, well, cheese and eggs, potatoes, right, then we get a list of elements here. And now we can work with this list as an internal representation of what is given to us here. Okay, so what's the next step? So before we go into actually getting the data from the API, I would say let's mock this data for now, and let's just expect, or let's assume for now that we already have the data in some form. Let's assume that there's actually a function that's called retrieve recipes, right? So if we go back to Visual Studio here, let's say there's a function called retrieve recipes that you give ingredients to, right? And it returns some list, the list of ingredients. And right now, we just want to mock this because that's one of the things we want to do. We want to say, well, we have recipes, and we get these recipes by saying retrieve recipes with ingredients, right? And the second thing we need to do in this recipe search function is we want to introduce these retrieved recipes into the document. So we might say something like, let me see. So here we just add recipes to document, right? Oops, apologies for that. There you go. Okay, I'm just checking whether we have any hands up. If there are any questions, please do let me know, either with your hand up or in the chat. Okay. So, and now let's say what we have down here is the data that we want. We want to have this jalapeno souffle, and we want to have the curry and cabana sausage roll. And I already prepared this beforehand, so let me get this. So now there are different ways of how we can represent those things. We can represent those as an object. We can represent this as just an array of strings and arrays. What I want to do is I want to introduce an object class. I want to say, well, let's have this class called recipe. And the recipe is a constructor. Second, let me just copy paste this. This is not worth, right? So what that means is now we can store, we have a class that gives us schematics to store title, ingredients, a thumbnail, and the URL. And now what I also have prepared is just the list of those two things. Yep. So here in retrieve recipes, I already have an element of those two things in here. Okay, so now if we go back to the search, here recipe search, let's quickly just say console.log recipes. If we go to the browser and look at our console, this should provide us, oops. Yes, this provides us with two recipe objects that look like this. Right? So we have, and this is also the data we would actually get if we query this this API, with the difference that here we already have the ingredients as a list of ingredients, right? So just keep that in mind. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we actually want to add those recipes to the document. So let's say we have one of these recipes and we want to add them to the document. What should happen? We want to introduce the same DOM we have down here. So right here we have an article with an H2 and all this different structure here. So let's copy paste one of these. Right. Let's remove the other one actually, because this is just an empty DOM. And we have the section with ID results. And let's say, if we look at here now, this is now empty. And what we want to do is we want to have a function that where we say, well, create this node for us. Create, what's a good name for this? Create a recipe element that we pass recipe. Okay. And now there are different ways of doing this. The first thing I want to show you is using inner HTML. So here I can now say, I still want to return a document element. So what I will do is I will say, well, I have an article and document.create element article. And then what I can say is article.inner HTML. And what this does is it actually introduces all this here. Let's remove this too. I can introduce strings as HTML, and it will then parse the string. So let's do this. Oops. Okay. And then just return the article. And now, of course, we're not done because right now it's always going to be the curry and cabana sausage rolls. But let's just keep it that way for a moment. And let's say we want to add, we're going to loop through these element recipes and do this. So what we can do is we can say for recipe of recipes, and we can say, let's say we have it's called results. What was it called? Yeah, it's called results. And here we can say results.append child, create recipe element, and we pass this recipe. And right now, I mean, this recipe is totally ignored. We're just returning a constant string. I just want to show you how the inner HTML works for now. Okay, so right now, if we go back here and we reload this, oops, an error somewhere, 64. Oh, got the N here. And just pass anything. Okay, it's going to create two of those because we have two elements in the list that we're returning, and we're just insert this element here. But now let's actually change this and say, well, I have this recipe here. Let's copy it down there. For convenience, I have this recipe here. And what I can do now is with this template literal, I can literally just say, well, let's replace this with actual variables from the recipe. Recipe dot, what do we have here? We have the thumbnail. So let's copy this. And then in the recipe object, we have an element called URL. Here we're gonna add the URL. Now the ingredients are more interesting because now we have to loop through elements. And here is where the internal representation comes into play that I talked about before. If we still had the comma separated representation as a string, then this would require another step to parse it here. But since we already have this object representation, we can use it to loop over these elements. So here, oh yeah, here we have the title. And so for this, let's create a helper function. Let's say here we create create ingredient list ingredients. And here we can actually already call that function and say create ingredient list with recipe dot ingredients. There you go. And what this will do is it will just, oops, it will loop through the ingredients and okay, so if we now call this function here, okay, it will give us what we had before. And we'll do that because what happened is it looped through the retrieve recipes result, which is just these two objects, and printed them. And it did so by heavily using this inner HTML. Now, for assignment 2, you can definitely use inner HTML. It will make your life easier. It's what you would expect of a template engine to be like, right? However, there's an issue with inner HTML. And the issue is that if you get any sort of object or string from outside of your control and you want to introduce it into your site, there might be injection happening. There's a security issue at play here. And I want to show you that security issue. So let me copy paste another example that I have here. Because inner HTML just injects everything that you put it in there, you can also inject scripts. So let me add one more thing here. Let me add this recipe here. Okay. Okay, if you have a look at this recipe, what it will do is it will load a 1x1 pixel from Wikipedia. You can use whatever 1x1 pixel, something that loads fast. And in the onload of the image, it will introduce code. And once it executed the code, it removes itself. So you can't even see it in the resulting HTML, right? And just remember that this right now is just something that I introduced, right? But this retrieve recipes could very well just retrieve it from the actual API. And if the API that you're getting things from is compromised or malicious in some way, it might have things like this in there. So if we go back here, right? See, we can see that this code was injected from outside, and mostly because we used inner HTML. So what should we do? So what we can do is, instead of trusting all of our inputs, right? So in this case, this was injected in the title. So we could say, well, here we don't want to have inner HTML working. We want to do this by using inner text. Okay, so let's just create a new function here. So security issue, right? And let's just copy that function and try to write it from scratch. Now, instead of saying inner HTML here, we would say, well, what does the article have? Well, the article has one div here, right? That's an outer container. So let's say, okay, we have another div. The outer container is document.createElements div. And then in this outer, and here we have the ingredients container. So let's do that. Let's just call it thumbnail URL container, and the other one would be the ingredient container. And now let's see what's in there. So in here we have an image. So let's say for this one here, we create the image. You say, well, document.create element img, and then img.source would be, and now we start seeing these things again here. You can now say, well, the source is the thumbnail. Oh, we also have a title in here. Sorry, I forgot about that. So we have title, which is at H2. Now you can already see this is a lot of typing, right? But the nice thing here is now we wouldn't say inner HTML, we would say inner text. And what this enables us to do is everything that's in here is being parsed actual text. So if we say recipe.title here, the injected malicious code that we saw below will be injected as actual text. It would not see any parsing, right? And that's the benefit of using this here. And now, since we started, let's actually finish this. It's not that much work, but it is still kind of tedious. So we have the image, and we have the link here. So let's add, say, okay, link.href is the recipe.url. Okay. So now what needs to happen is we need to add those things, right? We need to say thumbnail container, append child. First the AMG, and then thumbnail container, append child. Link, right? And here, article, this article, append child, title, and so on and so forth. I'm contemplating right now if I should finish this or I should just copy paste the end result. I think it will take just another 2 minutes, so I hope you can bear with me, and I will just finish this in the next couple minutes. So we have the thumbnail container, we added image and link, right? Then we're done. Now we have to add this here. So in the ingredient container, we have the ingredient title, which is the H3. What else do we have? Oh yeah, now we have this container that contains other elements. So we have const ingredient list. And here in a loop, we can do the same thing. Actually, we can just copy paste. We can rewrite our helper function here. And that's actually nice. It's actually nice to see. So instead of this constructing a set of strings, what this will now do is we will pass the container up. Or what can we do? Yeah, we can either pass a container, or let's do this ingredient list. So let's call it pretty. It's fine. And here we can call this element and the ingredients again. So here we would do let list element and now we take the ingredient list and append. Okay, and we don't have to return anything. We just say here and now in the ingredient container, we add the ingredient title, and we add the append child, and we add the ingredient list. And I think, oh yeah, now in the outer container, we have to add the thumb URL container and the ingredient container. And I think now we're actually done. So if you compare to this here, this should be it. And eventually we add the outer container to the article. We say article append child outer container, and this should be it. I'm pretty sure I made a mistake here somewhere because it's actually a lot of code. So let's have a look here. Yeah, there you go. 49. Yeah, not by ID. There you go. Let's see. It's not defined. Interesting. 51 typo. Iterable. Huh. Really? Oh, because I didn't pass the actual ingredients. There you go. Okay, and now we see the interesting thing. Now we see that what was an injection of vulnerability before is now just displayed as actual text, right? So now we can see that if something is being malicious, it just looks ugly because but it makes it visible that there is a vulnerability in general. Oh, there's a question by Adrian. Sorry if I missed this. Okay, Adrian. You can talk into the mic.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I just want to question this code. Can you upload it or?
Yes, so the code is already up on the repo. And also if you go through the commits, it goes through all the stages that I'm talking about here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions so far? Anyone else? Let me see. Yes, Yishu?
So,
Okay, Yishu?
Mark, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So first of all, is there a HTML and CSS only way to do the prevent default you talked about like 20 minutes ago?
Oh, okay. So to do the prevent default only with HTML, I think is not possible. What you can do is on the form itself. So if you go to the form here, if you can already attach an event listener there. You can say on click, right? And what I see people, what they often do is just they say return false, and that is also an implicit prevent default behavior.
So my second question is this: is there a way to generate the inner text code? Because I think I think it should be like easily scriptable. Is there like an automated way out there?
Right. So the reason I showed you all of this is to show you how tedious it is and how much work it actually is, because the API is just not great.
Yeah.
And in the next 2 minutes, I'll show you what I did at least in order to make this a bit more bearable. So I'll show you in a minute, okay?
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Let me see. Any other hands up? Yes, I saw one here. Where was it? Daniel. Let me give you the mic. Yes, Daniel.
So my question is, can't you use inner HTML and just say toString, the function, in order to prevent script injection?
Absolutely. So if you, I hope everyone can hear what the people are asking, but I think you can. I repeat anyway. So the question was, if we use toString, for instance, on the object that we're getting, isn't that already enough to prevent those things from happening? I'm not sure if toString does what we need to do in that case. We could try it out, but any way or form of escaping the input already helps. So if you're dealing with the input in let's say in a manner that you already expect something fishy might happen, and you escape it, you stringify it, or whatever you do to make it non-vulnerable, that's already really good. The inner text option, just or using the API that is safe, just prevents you from doing the bad thing by accident. That's the only thing I can say here. But definitely, if you deal with the input in a good way, then that's already enough. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, let me scroll through. Bernhard has a question. Bernhard.
I asked a question as well in the chat. I don't know if you could see it. In the inner HTML, there is a strange expression, $RARR, between the image and the anchor tag. What does this do?
It's just a right arrow. So it's okay. I think it's called, yeah, it's just a way of HTML allowing you to introduce certain symbols.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, scrolling. All right, no questions anymore. Great. So as I mentioned before, if you see this is very tedious because the API is just very long-winded and it's weird, right? So what I did for when I implemented this the first time around, you can see that a lot of things that you do here repeat themselves, right? Usually you have a container. The container has certain elements in there, and you want to attach certain attributes, certain things, right? It's very common to do very similar things. So let me actually, I have, this is the actual other thing. I have this other code here called the recipe DOM. Oh, no, not the recipe DOM. DOM helpers. Oops, wrong one. DOM helpers. And you can see them in, I wrote a module for that. So let's copy paste this into here also. Same. Okay, so what this does is the same thing that this does here. It just abstracts away certain things. So here I just introduced a utility function for a container. The container has certain elements and a tag. You can introduce a text element because that's what we mostly want to do here. You can set attributes and you can create a list, for instance. And so this is definitely not perfect and complete in any way, but it covers a lot of things that we have here and makes it a bit easier. So let's remove this. And there are other libraries out there that already do this in some way, but I just wanted to show you that the way that the document object model works, and I think is a bit better than maybe inner HTML sometimes, is that it allows you to compose things together in a certain way. And this kind of shows you that through abstraction, you can make it a bit more bearable to use a DOM. And here I want to also, yeah. Let's just create this. Oops. So in this solution that I uploaded also to GitHub that you will see, still need an article. Up. Oops. Yep. I see. All right, so what you can see here is that I have two helper functions. I have a function called create recipe elements that creates a div container that contains an h2 and another container that contains this URL container and the ingredient container. Although I think I forgot to copy the ingredient. Oh, yeah, there it is. Oop. And that probably, oh yeah, there you go. And we'll still need, here we can say return, or actually we have to, oh no. Ah, doesn't matter, it's fine. Okay, so what I want to show you here is that even though using the DOM can be tedious, if you write some helper functions and you know these are available on GitHub now, you can use them if you want to. It's definitely a bit easier to do this. And let's now test if I didn't do anything wrong. Oh yeah, I have to actually import this thing. So in order to use this thing, I have to import it. So I have to say this. So here, I don't have to do it up top, but I like to do it here because I like to have all my imports on the top of the file, so I know what's actually being used from outside. And there you go. And we have the same thing. Nice. All right. So now that we have this, we want to move away from, let me see, it's the right file, I hope so. Yes, we want to move away from retrieve recipes being this constant and actually retrieving these elements from outside. So we want to actually retrieve them from recipe copy. So we want to go here and get recipes from here. Before we move on to that, let me see if there are any questions. So are there any questions before we move on? Quick show of hands. Yes. Solomon?
Hello?
Yeah, hello.
Can we use jQuery?
No, no outside libraries. And in general, I would suggest you not use jQuery anymore. The jQuery was great for a long time, but nowadays with ECMAScript, I don't think there's a need for jQuery, especially because jQuery is quite large in what you load into your website, and it doesn't. If you look at the cost benefit, it's not great. And for assignment 2 especially, there are no outside libraries allowed.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Okay, let me see any other hands up before we move on. All right, that's it. So now we're going to go into how do we actually get those recipes. Oh, I forgot something before we move on. Obviously, if I just do search a bunch of times, then as you can see here, it will just add the same elements again and again. So whenever I do search, I want to clear the results. So let's do that. I can just say, oh yeah, so this function is, before I do that, yeah. First off, let's remove this function with the security issues. And then what we'll do here is before we add the elements here, we just say results dot inner HTML and just empty it. There are certainly other ways to do this. We can actually remove the DOM nodes in itself, but this is just an easy way to just clear everything within there. And if we load this again, right, and we say search all the time, this will not change, right? It will stay the same. Okay, so now let's move this function up. Move it up to here. And now we don't want to return these things. We want to return the actual recipes that we get. So how do we do that? Well, we have to use some method to retrieve data from through HTTP. And there's this method that we learned from last time in the lecture. It's called fetch. So fetch, you give a URL, and then it will collect the data, and you provide a callback, and so on and so forth. But there's another, I would say, interesting syntax we can use here. It's called async await. So we can say async. Say this is an asynchronous function, and now we can say, well, this fetch here is going to be response from some URL, and here we have to say await. Let me just quickly. One second before I do anything wrong, that's why. There we go. Okay, so we say fetch, and in fetch, we might say, where's the URL? Right, there it is. So we have this URL. Okay, sorry about that, folks. So we have this URL called recipecompany.com, then the API, then an I equals, and whatever ingredients you have. Now, the ingredients that we have here in retrieve recipes are ingredients that are in the form of a list of an object, or array in this case. What we need is the form in which you want to have it here. So what we want to have is maybe some function called serialize ingredients. Right. That given the ingredients will provide us with a serialized form for the URL. Or query. Say is, we can say ingredients dot join. So it's very easy in this case. Sometimes it's a bit harder. So we can join these here. And here we can say, well, we say serialize ingredient or query. Okay. So now we have this response. We're waiting for this response. So instead of using the promise API, and saying, promise.then, and then again then, and chaining this thing here, we can chain it into the same thing by using async and await. We can also say the actual data that we need, or the raw data. And you can see, what do we miss here? Oh, there you go. And here we say await response dot JSON, and we receive a JSON from that. Now, if we do just do that, just say console.log and say raw data for now, and let's see what happens. And return after that. Yeah, that will do nothing. Let's just return an empty list for now. And if we go back here and we want to retrieve something with cheese, what will happen? Well, right now nothing will happen because it will be blocked. There's a policy in place called course, a cross origin request. Access control and allow origin header is not set. So what that means is there's a security policy in place that doesn't allow us from our domain, right? In this case, localhost, because I started a local development server, to request data from another domain. Now, certain domains allow that. For instance, the Met API that we're going to use for assignment 2 allows those course requests. You can retrieve data from your local domain, and it's fine. Now, Recipe Puppy does not allow that, and there are good reasons for that. I don't want to go into that too much. What I will do though is I'll go into this API thing here that I provided, and we're going to use a course proxy. And all right, so we're going to copy this into our index.html. Okay, and what this will do is it will go to this course proxy. The course proxy will make the request to Recipe Puppy, and we'll add those headers that we need for our browser to allow those course requests to happen. And I added some links in the repository that tell you what course actually is and why it's important, and you shouldn't bypass this because there's a security policy behind this. But for now, just to learn how JavaScript works and how we do this requests, we're just going to do that. And what we're going to do is we're going to just wrap this with the course URL. Oops, there you go. Proxy URL. All right, and now if we send a request, that should work, hopefully. Okay, see, now the console.log that we have here works out, and we actually get the data. So if you look at the key results, we get what we actually need. Okay, so let me see if there are any questions so far. Any questions for everyone? Let me scroll through. No questions so far. I hope the chat actually works. Okay. And now what we want to do is we want to return the actual elements here. So we say, well, let's create the final array that we want here. Let's say the final array is recipes. Now what we'll do is we will say for, if we go back to this here, we can see what we have in here. We have the title, we have something with the href, we have ingredients, we have a bunch of things here we can use. You can also see that sometimes it's not super clean, so we might want to use a trim in here, for instance. And we have the thumbnail image. We have everything we need, right? And we have the ingredients that are comma separated, and we'll need them in an object. So we'll parse those things. And since this is the same thing, let's just call it parse ingredients. Or actually, no, let's not do that. Let's actually do what I did here. And here we also had this ingredients that does a serialize in the parse. Let's add this. So this is just an object that groups together two methods, serialize and parse, just to have the same name under it. No other reason, just a kind of a module thing going on here. So instead of using this function here, we can now just say ingredients dot serialize. Okay. There you go. And here what we'll do is we'll say let raw recipe of raw data dot results, and then we're going to return the recipes. So now we'll do, or actually we can just, so we can use this loop here to do that, but we can actually also just map over it. So yeah, so that's what I actually, so here we can just say, well, recipes dot push, and then we say new recipe and add the data. But at the same time, if you want to use a more functional approach, you can just say, well, there you go. Just copy and pasting this for now. You just do this. You can say, well, raw data dot results dot map. What this will do is it will go through all, because the results are already a list. It will go through all the lists and not replace, but for every item of the list, it will return an item in a new list that is a recipe. Right. Yep, that's fine. All right, and then we return these recipes. Now for recipe search, to use retrieve recipes in this way, now because of this async here, retrieve recipes has automatically become a promise. So what we can do is we can just make this async as well. And here just say await, right? And this will solve our issues for us. And let's make this a bit smaller. Reload. Cheese. Okay, and now we get all the cheese elements. Nice. And if we say cheese and, I don't know, cracked black pepper, just what I see down here, it will give us that. Everything that has cheese and cracked black pepper in it. That is nice. Okay, and that was the part of how do we get data from outside inside. Now for assignment 2, I want to point you to something that we didn't really cover in the lecture, and this is promise.all. And I will add a pretty good link for that on the website. And what promise.all does, if you have multiple requests that you want to get out, and you want to then, for instance, loop over the results of those asynchronous computations or requests, then you can use promise.all. And that's something that you might want to look at if you are working through assignment 2, something that you might be able to use or say might be good to use. Okay, are there any questions so far? Let me see if there are any hands up. Okay, so in the repo we have a few more things that I added. What I added is local storage. So if you want, we can go through that. I think it's very easy. So if I just show you right now on here what I did. So what I did is in the retrieve function, instead of going directly for the fetch, I check with local storage whether there is an element. If there is, I'll return it from there. And if there's a new request, before I return the recipes, I will store the recipes in local storage. Right. And for that, I added a recipe cache class here, a module, sorry, that has a retrieve and a store function. Just be aware that if you use local storage, you have to serialize and then also parse the elements. you can only store strings or literals in local storage. You cannot store complex objects. If you want to store complex objects, you have to serialize them by saying JSON.stringify, and then you have to parse them once you get them out. Right. And another thing that I introduced is this, and it's already in there a little bit because I added the DOM from the other elements. So if yeah, I'm going to show you quickly. So if I show you the create recipe element here, and I show you show you this here, here. So if I introduce the ingredient links, I will not only, if I create so when I create the links here, I don't only create the link text, I will also create this link here. So if I do this cream cheese, it will add a parameter here, string cheese. Right now, there's nothing reacting to that, and let's change that now. So let's introduce how to react to parameters when you get them. So what we need for that is we need another event listener. Right now, we're listening once the form is being submitted, right? So if we submit this form, then we have this event listener here that says, well, once you submit, do this thing here. Now we need another event listener that says, well, if you can do this on document dot add event listener. If the document is being loaded, and there's a particular load element here, and I'm just going to copy paste it again from here. There you go, DOM content loaded. Oops. Right. And what this event means is, as soon as every element in the document object model is fully loaded, let's do something. And we also, again, get an event. Okay. And now in this event, what we'll do is we'll read the Q parameter, I think it is. No, we will read the ingredients parameter, and we'll act accordingly. So we'll go in here, and what we will do is, let me see, yes. So I'm just going to copy paste this for now. There's the browser object model API that's called one is document location, and in document location we can use the URL API to give this the search parameters, and then from here we get the ingredients parameter. So now if we do console.log ingredients query, and we do the same thing here. Yeah, we can see cream cheese here, right? And if we say, well, something else, we'll see something else here, right? So far, so good. Now, what should happen if this is empty? Well, if it's empty, then just do nothing. Yeah. Let's just return. Now, if it's not empty, what we're going to do is, well, we just want to do the same thing as we do here. We say recipe search. Right. Now we have this ingredients query. I want to do the same thing. Right. Say. So if I say cheese and X here, oh, it will get us cheese and X, right? If I say avocado here, it will search for recipes with avocado. There you go. Soy sauce, it will search for soy sauce, and so on and so forth. Now, what we did in the beginning is one way of doing these things. So now if I say potato, right, and do search, or if I just type potato up here, it's the same thing. The problem with that is that if I do search potato here and then I search something else, right? Let's search potato and then let's search cheese here, eggs, right? So what will happen when I press back? Right? It will go to avocado. It will not go through all the elements that I searched within here, because that will require us to manipulate the history of the browser. Now that's possible, but it's more complicated than it needs to be, I think, in this case, because in this case we can use the regular behavior of the browser and it'll be okay. So if I just don't prevent the default here, right? And the only thing I do is that, you know, and I just do it here, right? Prevent default. And the only thing I do is add some convenience and say, well, only if the search box is empty, just stop things from happening. Otherwise, let's just jump here, basically. Because what will happen is we'll reload the page with the proper query parameters, and then we'll go through this event cycle here. So now if I go back here, right, and I search for cheese, and I search for, yeah, let's just go cracked black pepper, and I search for sesame seeds, and I search for tuna, right? Every time I go back, it actually preserved the history for me. And that's the behavior that I actually want to have usually. Sometimes it's not the behavior you want to have. Sometimes what we did before by preventing the default behavior and not adding the history is what we want from an application. But I think in this case, and in many cases, we'll have it in assignment 2. This is actually what we want. But I want to show you both possibilities. And with that, I actually want to close my live demonstration. I hope it was insightful and helpful. Basically, not the exact same, but pretty much the same steps that I followed in the live demo, I also have here in the GitHub repo as part of commits. So you can look through the commits and see how this thing evolved. And the repo is a bit nicer in the sense that it has multiple modules that I work with here. Right. So now here I have the recipe, the cache module that I showed you before, and I have the DOM module that encapsulates all the things that I do within the document object model, right? And if you look at the index HTML, the code in there is actually pretty short. Right? And last but not least, I want to show you, so in the live demo, what I didn't do is any sort of error handling, because I just want to quickly show you how it's done. What you do want to have is these try catch blocks that if something goes wrong, you handle them. So either do that, or if you use promises in a more classical way, you can use the catch chaining within the promises. Okay, and so with that, I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. So please just raise your hands if you have any questions. Okay. I don't see any raised hands so far. I also don't see any messages on the chat. Let me just scroll through this one more time. Are there any questions on the assignment or any other thing regarding the lecture or the assignments? I'm also happy to take questions on that. So for assignment 2, we did a lot of more due diligence and looked at the test framework is doing better than assignment 1. I also went in last week and implemented assignment 2 on my own. So I usually don't have a lot to do with the assignments. It's Michael Schroeder who does most of that stuff. And so this time I went ahead and implemented assignment 2 to see, you know, where some tension points might be. And I think I implemented it alone in about, you know, 8 to 10 hours. It's hard to gauge completely. So it shouldn't be too much effort. even if you don't have much experience. I think it's a very good assignment that goes through a lot of the things that are important in JavaScript. What I do have to say though is if you plan on working similarly to assignment 1 and just have one person do one page, I would advise you not to do that, because there are a lot of elements in assignment 2 that require joint collaboration. So I would suggest that if you before you start assignment 2, just meet together and go through the README of the assignment and the text there and the requirements, and figure out what are the joint parts of those things, so you don't add additional effort for each member by people implementing the same thing twice or 3 times even. So let me just one more time see if there are any questions left. Oh, yes, Clemens. Yeah, Clemens. Clemens, is there any question from your side? Oh, okay. Okay, now I see all the questions that you have. I apologize. So there was a chat window, but there's apparently another question window. Clemens says it was a mistake. I see. All right. What about the text in a full recipe? So is there some kind of built-in HTML escape method in JavaScript? I think there is. So I think if you Google JavaScript and HTML escape, there's definitely something. There's a JavaScript escape function. Oh man, apologies to every one of you. Now I see all the question panes. Okay. So let's go through the questions here. Okay, we already had that. Will this code be uploaded? Yes, the code this will be uploaded. It's already on GitHub. So if you go through to the GitHub organization Web Engineering TU Wien and you search for recipe, then you will find this repo. What other questions do we have? There's a typo in, okay. No jQuery. The audio might not be working. Hope it worked for most people. Okay. So apparently some people had issues with the audio. We will check on that. I think the easiest way would be to download the client, but I understand and if not everyone wants to do that. So I'll get in touch with people that said the audio wasn't working and see what we can do there. Otherwise, let me just quickly go through that again. All right, it seems that there's no question left. So thank you all for attending, and I hope that was an interesting journey through developing an application from scratch. Definitely have a look at the resulting JavaScript that I have in the repo. It's a bit cleaner and more modularized. And otherwise, I will not see you next week. So next week there will be no lecture and no demo, but I will see you in 2 weeks where we'll start to talk about web servers and backends. Thank you.